Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah. I'm up for the journey.
yeah. And I want to add in the beginning is that, so I had a lot of disagreements with this guy in the beginning, and now I'm joining his course. So
Honestly, it's a common occurrence for me.
yeah.
Probably,
Is that a manifestor thing?
I would say probably a manifestor and a line 4 thing. 4-1. You know,
Mm.
I'm 4-1, so I'm on train tracks. I'm just kind of fixed. I'm going this way. People are like, no, 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 no. And they're like, okay, I'll get on your train. I'm like, sweet, welcome aboard.
Well, we do tend to agree on human design, so if we start
Uh-huh.
to, that's also always a safe ground.
Yeah.
So,
Mm.
since we're doing the live on my page, I actually want to ask you to introduce yourself.
Great. All right. So my name's Damien, obviously Damien Bohler, and why this is relevant, I'm the founder and director of something called Evolutionary Relating, which we're just starting to gain traction. It's something I've been working on for 2 years practically, and I incepted the idea of this maybe 10 years ago. I started thinking about it. And honestly, kind of the direction that I'm heading, I've known since I was 18, maybe even younger. This is one of the things of being a 4-1 in
Wow.
human design, is we have a fixed fate, and I've known my direction for a long time. As much as I've tried to throw it away, it's always come back. I'm like, okay, this is where I'm heading. So Evolutionary Relating currently is focused on improving the way in which we relate to each other as human beings. Right now, I've been turning my attention more towards romantic relationships, but that's not exclusive to that, just because I think there's a leverage point around romantic relationships in that we can expend a lot of energy in them not working, wanting them or them not working, and we lose a lot of energy. And that energy, when we're in a positive, healthy relationship, that we start to generate energy. And, my biggest passion is like, how do we create ripples of change on the world so we can have a more beautiful world? Like, we live on freaking utopia, planet utopia, and we're not maximizing our ability to live on this planet in the way that it's possible for us. So my desire is, how can I create at least some little bit of impact that will ripple into the generations to come? I'm not under the illusion that I'll necessarily get to reap the rewards of my work. I might get a little bit of it, but my grandkids, hopefully, and further on, if I ever have grandkids, would be what I'm thinking about, future generations. So I'm really oriented around I'm just going to give a little bit more context of who I am. My background is in environmental science. That's what I studied at university. I mean, I started with engineering, was like, nah. And then I started environmental science, and I kind of worked as a teacher for a while. And then I got into permaculture. So I started to understand how to work with the ecosystem. Permaculture blew my mind. But then I spent a lot of time on different communities, and I found always it was the relational piece. It's like, we understand the engineering, we understand the ecology, we understand all of these amazing things of how we can change the world, but we don't relate so well. And that's where communities would always break down, is the relationship part. And so I'm like, this is a maximal leverage point to create the change that I want. Like, honestly, if I had it my way, I would probably go farm right now. I love farming. I just want to grow forests. I want to grow food forests. I love working with animals. My goal is to get back there, but I realize that we actually need to change the nature of the way we relate on the planet. So that's what I'm focused on right now, is working in that domain.
Oh, beautiful. And I can attest to that. Maybe there's nothing else that can be more absorbent of energy than if there's a problem in a romantic relationship in any way, or dating or whatever. And that actually got me into celibacy. Like, it was 2 years ago, and I was so tired of being in the same loop. It was like over and over. Like, the guys I was dating were very different types, but it was the same dynamic that was showing up. And I realized I needed to go in and be with my echo and do this healing. And then a few months ago, I realized, partly also when communicating with you, I already knew it, but I didn't want to admit it yet, is that, okay, I actually can't go any further by myself. It's like, there's only so much I can do by myself. And then also realizing a lot of reason why I'm not dating or having sex and yeah, being with others now is also in a certain degree a protection mechanism. You know, it's like as long as I'm alone, I'm controlling everything, right? So it was a little bit like, oh, and it took me, it's just taking me some months to kind of gradually kind of loosen up. And now it feels natural to say it, but just a few months ago, I would be triggered and I would be angry. I would knew it was true, but still.
Beautiful awareness. Yeah. And that's definitely a journey that many of us can go on. It's like you said, there's only so far we can go on our own before we need others, you know. And it's like we need others at a romantic level, you know, and something that we've contested a little bit about. I've made this statement that, you know, the partnership is the center of the community. And you know, and I'm not so rigid on that, as in like you need to have this, but there is a sense that the partnership, it creates a nucleus of family, and it is the conglomeration of families that create community. You know, it's like families coming together, and ideally a community is a dynamic family, meaning that, you know, that statement, it takes a village to raise a child. It's like, but that's a conglomeration of multiple families. And in the future, we may have much more organismic styles of relating than kind of nuclear monogamous couples, but we need to get ready to be there. You know, it's like our nervous systems need to know how to be safe with one person before we can actually expand to open to more than one person. You know, it's like there are some foundational elements that need to go in place. But I love hearing your realizations in that, and it's really beautiful. You know, and I think that, like you said, there's so far we can go on our own, that we can evolve on our own and heal on our own. But then that deeper layer actually starts coming in connection with someone else. It doesn't necessarily even need to be romantic, but there is a relational component to the way that we grow and evolve. You know, and I have one of the models that I love to refer to from this is integral theory. I don't know if you've ever dived down that rabbit hole of Ken Wilber. I'll give a very quick download of a framework. One of the frameworks he works with is the 4 quadrants of reality that I really enjoy, and very, very rapid speed framework download. You can think about that in the non-dual universe. Before there was anything, there was only oneness or nothingness. It's like there is no duality, there's no separation between anything. And at some point, the first separation occurred, the first distinction. We're in a dual universe, meaning there's more than one. You know, that's what duality is. And that first distinction is the distinction between, you could look at it as consciousness, or the interiority, the subjectiveness of experience, and matter, the objectiveness or externality of reality. And then we can go a further division, and we look at singular versions of that and plural versions of that. So we have singular consciousness, I, and we have plural consciousness, we, which is relational. We have singular objective, which is it, which is, you know, like a body, a cup, you know, whatever, a phone. And then we have plural objective, which is systems of objects. We have an ecosystem, we have an economic system, we have, you know, an information system, we have a technology system, we have systems of electricity and wireless transfer and the internet and everything. It's collections of objects. And that's essentially all of reality can fit into one of those quadrants. And so there's a primary sense of like we is a deep aspect of reality, we. So when we do personal development work, we're developing I. But when we do relational work, we're developing the we, where we're developing the intersubjective nature of consciousness or reality, which is really cool. And that's what I get super geeky and excited about.
Yeah, but technically, if there's more to the couple, it would be bigger, right?
Well, the couple is one intersubjective unit. You know, it's one collective unit. Yeah.
But it's funny because I don't technically know what type of relationship I am looking for. So, but it's simply that we keep going around this. It's, for me, it feels too much boxed in as thinking of it needs to be a monogamous relationship.
Totally. I don't necessarily hold to any stricture around what relationship could be. Just that I'm aware that to evolve in consciousness, we need to include a relational component. We need to evolve the way that we relate with others, and it doesn't even need to be
100%.
romantic. Just that we're in We're in an unfolding relational. There's a recent Harvard study just come out, a long-term study that looked at they wanted to find out what is the #1 key indicator of happiness, and what they found was community. Having a positive community around you is the #1 determinant of whether you're going to have a happy life or not.
Yeah. And for instance, I can completely attest to that, because when I'm living in Norway, I'm living in an area where, you know, most people, they grew up and they just move a few blocks and they just continue in the same area. And so there's not much expansion of consciousness, really, honestly. And people are pretty similar. And I would say it goes for the whole, actually, of Norway. Norwegians tend to be pretty like one type. There's not that much kind of flexibility. Norwegians tend to love to think that they're so free and so alternative and whatever, but they're not. And when I'm living in Norway, in this little town, which I'm doing because it's close to my parents, it's practical because of my daughter, and etc. But parts of me are actually dying. I have to admit, it's like I can literally feel like in my body that I need community. And it's such a different thing for me when I am in Oslo, when I am in other parts of Scandinavia, now that I'm in Mexico. Because there's more like-minded people, and there's more touch, there's just more warmth, there's just more connection. And it's been really interesting to see how much it affects me and how quickly it affects me, including things like my skin. And yeah, so I totally agree. Relating is really important. And I think another aspect for me to kind of reject that is because it was so little available for me in Norway. So that's also something that just came to me where you were speaking now. It's like, is this bubbling up of the shadow? It's like, okay, there's a reason why you rejected it. It's because you want it, and it's difficult. And so you're pretending to yourself, you know, shadow, that no, you don't want it.
That's my hypothesis around the premise of what we call avoidant. You know, avoidant attachment. Avoidant attachment to me is, I want it, I don't believe I can have it, so I'm going to reject it.
Yeah.
With life, with relationship, with a partner, with intimacy, with anything, there's a like, I actually deeply yearn for this. Don't believe I can have it. Don't believe I'm worthy of it. Don't believe I'm good enough for it. And so I'm going to reject it. I'm going to push it away from me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a harsh reality to come to kind of start cracking that. Usually is a lot of grief. There's a lot of grief underneath that, you know, and I imagine that's been part of your journey of opening to that. There's actually like the deep grief of like wanting this thing and not being met in it.
Yeah, and the beginning of my journey, what I call my true awakening, was 5 years ago when I realized that I needed to break up with someone that I felt like was my twin flame. I now believe that twin flame is one of the ultimate kind of victimhood patterns, so I no longer subscribe to that, but in the beginning I did. And even though I was intensely in love with him, my intuition suddenly came online and told me, you need to break up with this guy. And in this breakup, I suddenly completely saw my ego and how I was pushing away him and others, not only him, also friends and connection, that I was pushing away when I actually wanted them closer. Actually, I'm saying that, I'm hearing my 59 pearl, you know, fair like coming up. That's funny. And yeah, so that was a deep dive. In the beginning, it was 3 months of crying like I never cried in my whole life. It was just crying and crying and crying and crying. Luckily now, when these shadows come up, I just love them. So like I also just want to state it's really, and that's why I say that I guide in shadow work, because I actually love when shadows pop up now. It's like, ooh, okay. And just yesterday, I realized, so I'm in contact with men now, starting to open up for dating, and I just realized there was my drama coming up. My story of being too much, and that they were not really interested, or this person wasn't interested. So what did I do? I tried to push him away.
I feel like I'm too much. Maybe you're not interested in me, so I'm not interested in you. I don't like you. There's something wrong with you. Yes,
you're pulling away, so I'm going to pull away first.
I'm gonna reject you way before you.
Much bigger.
Oh, yeah.
And today having a beautiful conversation about it. And I have to say that is also why I don't imagine myself being able to date someone who hasn't done this kind of work to some degree.
Yeah, it becomes really hard. The more that we kind of develop self-awareness, self-reflective capacities, the ability to look at ourselves. Essentially, personal development is developing the capacity to look at and understand who we are. You know, that's really what we're doing here. And, you know, we could do that for infinity, but there's certain thresholds where you develop a certain level of self-reflective capacity. And it's like, I can't be around anyone who doesn't have that. It's just like speaking to an alien. You know, we're just on wavelengths, and we really are. You know, the world is full of different wavelengths. There are different people at different developmental stages, and if we're not feeling met, you know, like you said, when you're back in Norway, it's like if we're not feeling met and seen and heard in the fullest of who we are, it will feel like a kind of death. It will feel like part of us is dying because our soul is not being seen. You know, our soul wants to shine, it wants to be seen, it wants to be heard, it wants to be met, it wants to be connected to others who feel the same way as we do, you know. And so what happens is, unfortunately, but it's changing, you know, we are in a developmental wave right now, but as we develop, there's usually a point where we get a little bit lonely because the current ecosystem of people around us haven't moved the way that we have. A lot of people might have a big awakening and suddenly there's no resonance, and you go through this period of like, where are my people? And you have to go find them. You know, you have to go to new events and new things, and you have to go find them. And then you do, and you go, oh my God, this is what it's like to have people. This is what it's like to have a tribe. This is what it's like to actually be met by others.
It's and that's a lot of dying too in this kind of, because it's a lot of goodbyes to relationships. And a lot of like I also experience like kind of connecting with people, thinking, oh, this is my tribe, and then realizing after a while, like, no, I was too quick. It's like, this is not working. And I think it's something I wish that people spoke more of, is how much, as you said before, like how much grief, how many layers of grief is actually underneath when we're opening up our heart, because we're meeting the things that where we're bleeding from when we were kids, when we were younger, past relationships. So anything we're not, you know, really fully being with, allowing the grief to be there, it will come back and bite us in the ass.
One of my teachers from many years ago, one of the ways that he talked about how we start emotionally unfolding is that we meet, when we're starting to go in, the first thing we meet is anger. You know, that's the first layer. And then we start meeting fear. And then under the fear is the grief. And it's like, we kind of don't really move on until we've grieved. You know, it's like, you know, I have this thing centered coming up. You know, we're not necessarily going to go into trauma release, but when we are starting to release trauma from our body, it usually comes with grief. You know, there is grief for the innocence that was missed, the innocence that was unseen, the innocence that was violated, the innocence that was hurt, the innocence that was rejected, the innocence that was abandoned. And we grieve the loss of that innocence, the impact of that innocence in us. And when we grieve, when we actually deeply grieve, we regain that innocence. That innocence actually comes back. That's the amazing thing about it. When we release the anger, we move through the fear and we start actually grieving, then the innocence comes back to us and we start to touch that, you know. And innocence is not naivety, you know. Innocence with consciousness, innocence on the other side of consciousness is not naivety at all. It's actually like light, you know. Gene key 3, that one.
Okay.
Chaos to innovation to innocence.
Okay. I didn't know.
Innocence is beautiful. It's a acidic state to be in innocence.
For me, it's actually connected to being sensitive. So for me, I think innocence is the same as being sensitive, because the more deeply sensitive we are, the more we also truly feel very early on what's going on. And for me, that's also really important in connections with other people. So I just have to try and find someone to turn on the lights. Do you know where to turn on the light? Because the sun is setting now, so it's going to be dark.
I can still see you fine.
Okay. Oh, and now crazy. Someone is having a party driving by. I don't know if you can hear it.
I can't hear it.
Oh, you can't hear that?
I can a little bit. Someone's having fun.
Okay. Where was that? Yeah. Yeah, sensitivity. So for me, it's also so important to be sensitive when it comes to the earlier I can detect that I'm feeling anger, or sadness, or just any kind of trigger, the earlier I can also communicate from a calmer place. But if like, but we train to kind of suppress these emotions, and I pretend that things are okay, and that's when the drop spills over, you know, the famous drop, and suddenly like we're screaming, or we said something, or we're rejecting someone like I did yesterday. When, you know, it's like if we were finally even more fine-tuned to sensitivity, because I believe there's always a journey coming deeper and deeper in sensitivity, then, you know, we get to have a different kind of communication. I'm getting a little bit distracted by the darkness here. Okay.
That's okay. You're still quite illuminated here. I can still see you.
It's like I'm the teacher of shadow work, so let's go into the dark.
We're slowly descending into the shadows now.
Yes, I'm taking you on a journey now. Well, it's I have to say, like, learning my human design profile, it really has made a lot of sense for me, and I didn't put much attention to the like the number lines until you guided me in that a few months ago. So that's been a big revelation. So,
Human design and the Jinkies is wild, and like I'm someone who's like very, and my human design explains it too. I'm like quite pragmatic. You know, I want to understand the first principles of how things work. I want to go right to the core, and what is the kind of blanket level, this actually applies to everyone, inarguable truths, you know. And then on top of that, I stack stuff that is like not necessarily that can be argued with, and I'm malleable there. But there are certain areas where I try and go, like when I teach about authentic relating, I'm not teaching how you should relate. I'm just like, here are the base level mechanics of how relating works. You understand these skills, you develop these skills, and then you can develop your own way of relating, understanding these skills. It's the same with the nervous system, you know, in the course that I'm doing now, and the course that comes after that, Regulate, is like, how do we understand our nervous system? How do we understand the way that trauma works? It just happens that way. When we understand how it works, then we can find our own solutions. We can actually reveal our own solutions. We can reveal our own communication patterns. And so that's something that I love doing. You know, I'm interested in terms of, you know, future work. I'm currently working with intimacy, as I told you about, but next level would be starting to work at the level of organization. How does business and marketing and sales work? You know, and that's something I'm currently studying, because I can feel that's something that I want to work with later. But it's not even about business, it's about organization of human beings. How does the ecosystem work? You know, how do things work at the base level? And what I was shocked to find, because I never was interested in astrology, you know, and I'm not necessarily like, I'm spiritual, but it has to be pragmatic to me to some degree. When I started diving into human design and Jinkies, I was just wowed by how consistently validating it was, how my own experience in my life was validated by understanding my design. Every reading I've ever given to anyone, they feel validated. It's just like, it's very, very predictive of a certain set of behavioral patterns to me to go, whoa, I don't quite know why this works the way it does. I mean, I have a little sense of the science, but it just seems to work, you know? So I feel the same about my own design. I started learning about my human design. I went deeper and deeper and deeper. I'm like, oh, this just explains me, which is such a great relief, because I'm just like, I can just stop trying to be anything else. I just be this. And I just get
there's
better.
nothing wrong with me.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with me. I am different than everyone else, and everyone else is different than everyone else, and I just get to be me, and I just learn how to be me, and beautiful. And so when we're going back up to community, and we're going even into relationships, romantic relationships and community, when we recognize that we're all absolutely and utterly unique, and what I love about human design is it highlights and it allows you to understand the blueprint of your own uniqueness, then we can like treat each other as unique. I stop trying to make you be like me. You know, I stopped trying to get in a relationship and going, you should think and do and act the same way that I do and value the same. It's not going to happen, you know. Hopefully we'll have enough resonance, you know. You need that to have a relationship, and same with a community. But we want to honor that uniqueness, that differentiation, that authenticity that we all have access to. You know, there's a few sayings that I've been playing with at some point. Maybe I'll put them on a t-shirt or something. The future is organismic is one of the ones that I like. And I think what that means is, like, I think that we're moving towards the next phase of how we're going to do humans. We're currently in the Western hyper-independence capitalism phase of things, but we're moving out of that. We're actually on the way moving out. We can see signs of that for those who know what to look for. And there's some really toxic representations of how we're moving out of that. But I think that the future is collectives of highly individuated beings. We're actually going to individuate completely. How can we be deeply unique? And then how do we work together from that unique sense? How do we recognize from a human design language? I'm a manifestor, you're a projector. How do we function together? And then knowing our different channels and our different gates and our different lines, what is our unique function in the organism, and how do they actually work together to create a more beautiful whole? You know, a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts, you know. And that's what I really get fascinated by. Like, first at the first unit, how do we do that as a couple? And then how do we extend that out into communities?
Yeah, but I
couple
guess
or more complex relationships too, you know, not necessarily just a monogamous couple, could be more complex.
Yeah. Oh, I think I just have someone come with the lighting, so maybe I'll not be so much the darkness goddess. Thank you so much. Yay! Oh, that was a lot of light.
There we go. There is light.
Light on the darkness. Let's see. Okay. I find it a bit tricky that you're on the bottom. So I keep looking at just myself, because you're talking about astrology. It's like I have a lot of Leo in me, so meaning that I get very on myself. Oh, it's why I love Zoom, because I can turn self-view off.
My partner has a lot of Leo. I'm well aware of the Leo vibes. I have a lot of Cancer and Gemini, so I have lots of Gemini, so I've got that kind of vibe going on. Yeah.
You know what? That came up for me very clearly yesterday, because my ascendant is Cancer, and I'm seeing how in relating, also in friendships, if I get truly hurt, I withdraw into my shell.
Yeah.
So astrology, like that. Yeah, it was so obvious for me yesterday. It's like, oh, I'm going into my shell.
Here we go, run in and hide, back behind the defenses. Yeah.
But what came up for me as you were speaking of that earlier is that how now because of knowing about trauma, I understand that this is an automatic reaction that I actually don't have any control of. What I can control is how I'm meeting myself afterwards. So I'm meeting myself with a lot of humor, because that's kind of a lot of my medicine, and a lot of compassion. And what I know now is, because I'm meeting myself with this softness, because I'm meeting myself with this softness, next time when I get in this situation, I know I'm going to do much better. Because what I think we tend to do is like, oh, why did I do it like that? You know, like that was me in the past. Talking about how we started, how much we can obsess about relationships is like 5 years ago. I remember, like, that's when I really got to understand how much I was obsessing and being inside of my head. I was taking this beautiful walk in nature, and the whole hour I was just obsessing in my head about why did I say that? What did he mean by that? It's like I was playing over like pretend discussions and also past discussions, and this was like ruminating inside of my head. So
yeah. Well, and that's the thing. It's like when we get triggered, we go into a child state. We lose access to the technicality, the prefrontal cortex, which is the higher order thinking. We lose access to all our tools and our skills. They go out the window, and we go into reactive. We go into unconscious reactivity. And really the goal, you know, of doing that work is, you know, there are a couple of approaches that I use to work with that. And the first is, like you said, we start developing awareness. We go, oh, I'm triggered right now. Can I get enough space to like hold my reactivity back? you know? So I don't do something really stupid. I may still be like out of control, but at least I don't do something stupid. And then over time, we start getting more and more distance. And so we're able to bring ourselves back to a regulated state quicker. We're able to at least find the eye of the storm. We may be in a storm of chaos, but we can be in the eye where I'm like, I'm really dysregulated. I'm really triggered right now. I don't feel good, but that doesn't mean I'm reacting with volatile behavior, you know? So that's kind of one step. And then when we actually start to do the trauma release work, we actually start to gently unfold trauma from our body. We actually resolve the triggers. You know, it's like the triggers, every trigger is bumping into a traumatic pattern somewhere in our body, and it's setting it off. It's like we've got landmines right throughout our body being. And every time some situation looks like a situation where we got hurt in the past, we go into an unconscious defensive pattern. So we're both learning how to regulate ourselves, and then we're also learning how to dissolve that traumatic tension in our body so it doesn't even trigger us anymore. And when we do it, when we actually meet it fully, we'll never get triggered by that situation again. You know, I've done that for numbers of things that were very big triggers in the past that don't affect me anymore, you know, and then new ones come up, and it's a layered process, you know, it's a process of unfolding layer at a time, trigger at a time, you know. Yeah,
no, I can totally relate. It's really, I'm gonna say, heartwarming how knowing this stuff really makes a difference. For me, the most important piece is self-acceptance. It's like I keep speaking about self-love, but for me, it's really about acceptance and meeting myself with warmth. And it's also making such a big difference knowing about trauma and knowing about attachment theory and knowing about these things, because what often happens is that with friends or people that we're just meeting or romantic partners and family members is that people go into a trigger, which is basically some kind of trauma response, and they will act irrationally. It's completely rational for them, you know, or me if it's me. And it's starting to hold that compassion piece rather than meeting it with that very rigid, it's like shadow patriarchy. Like, I'm not against patriarchy, but I'm saying the shadow polarity. Well, to me, polarity is when we're being pushed into a corner, which is in the world now. It's like you're not supposed to feel your feelings. You're just supposed to bite your teeth and all these things. And, you know, it's no wonder why it's so much heartbreak in the world.
The important thing is when it comes to relationship, the fact that we get triggered and we get reactive and we get upset isn't really the biggest concern. It's like how we repair afterwards. That's actually the main feature. If we can repair that, then we have the chance to actually create relationships that are sustainable and have longevity in them. And we repair that by, one of the things that I've been promoting lately is by saying sorry. You know, it's like, you know what? I was triggered and I said really mean things to you, and I was acting mean and I was making up stories about you that are not true about you, and I'm sorry about that. And then part of that is to be able to be humble enough to admit that. And part of the other side of that is when I receive their apology, to just forgive it. Yeah, you said mean things, but you were triggered. That's that compassion piece. And I let it go. I'm not going to hold anything that you said when you were triggered against you. I'm actually going to let it go. And if it hurts, if it's still hurting inside my body, I'm going to talk to you about it. I'm going to say, that thing you said, it really hurt. Do you mean it? Do you mean what you said when you're triggered? And when we're in a regulated state, we'll be able to say to each other, no, I didn't mean that. I'm really sorry. I'm actually really sorry that I hurt you like that. I didn't mean to say that. And then it's like, oh, can I receive and let that in and be like, oh, yeah, okay. I accept it. I accept that you didn't mean that. And then I allow it to transform me from the inside. And then we can actually repair. And when we repair, conflicts that we had, if we repair properly, and it may take multiple iterations, just like working with our own triggers takes multiple iterations before it's released. Working in a couple and going through conflict, it can take multiple iterations. But when we actually continuously repair, eventually that point of conflict, the thing that causes the fight, goes away and it never comes back. You can actually completely repair them. And then it's done. And it's done in this relationship. And if that relationship comes to an end, it's done in every relationship. That piece is gone, you know, and we can actually heal and repattern these things inside of us completely. And that's the amazing thing, you know, that the theory of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity means that our brain and nervous system is able to actually change and repattern itself given the right stimulus with the right conditions over the right length of time. Something I've recently started saying is we're neuroplastic, not neurofluid, which means that plastic molds with pressure and time. Fluidity just changes straight away. We're not neurofluid, and a lot of people can be disappointed. They do a cathartic process. You go do an ayahuasca journey or plant medicine. You have an amazing insight. You go back to your life, and the same problems hit you again. And you're like, "Why? What's wrong with me?" Or you come out of the cathartic release, and I'm healed. I saw this thing, and now I'm healed forever. I'm secure. I'm free of this trauma. And then something happens, and you get hit by it again, because you actually need to apply consistent pressure, positive pressure, meaning habitual repatterning over time in order to actually effectively change. You can't do it once. It doesn't happen once. You can have an amazing insight once, but you actually don't change with one iteration. Yeah.
No, I completely agree. And I would say it's also the quickest way tends to be the slowest way as well, meaning that to go gradually, because we get this kind of what's it called again, normative states. We're used to certain patterns, so it will also feel threatening for our bodies or our mind if we're doing too big of a change. And that's something I'm also discovering, how it also can feel threatening to be met with love. We also need to get, we have a safety threshold, we have a pleasure threshold, we have a pain threshold, we have all these kinds. So that's about expanding our nervous, we have an expanding our nervous system.
Like for a woman or even a man, opening into deeper levels of pleasure and orgasm is a slow process, and same with receiving love. Learning to actually be loved is not something you just go, wow, I'm loved. It's like a gentle unfolding of like receiving a little bit more love and like letting it touch deeper, and then a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And over time, we actually can look back and go, wow, compared to 6 months ago or 1 year ago, I'm something completely different. But day to day, it might not look that different, just like working out, anyone who imagines they can go to the gym once and suddenly like be ripped and have a six-pack when they haven't moved for ages is deluded, but you go to the gym 5 times a week, 4 times a week for a year, you will be different. You will look different. You train your nervous system with positive stimulus, 5-6 times a week for a year, and you will be different. Do it once, go have a medicine journey or a cathartic experience or like some kind of massive trauma release. You might feel better, after that first gym session. You'd be like, oh my God, I'm so pumped, but it won't actually make change unless you keep going. That's just how we work. That's one of the rules. And like you said as well, a saying I like is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Consistency over time is actually what creates change.
And I never thought I would say this, but I'm also getting to that point where I am I'm seeking the softness rather than these cathartic like things, because I'm also realizing a lot of these big things like ayahuasca ceremony and things like that can also just really just traumatize the body. It's like, okay, you may be expanding somewhere, but you're actually moving backwards because it's so intense for the body. And a lot of times we need this intensity because maybe we're not in touch with our feelings. And so it feels great to have access to them. But there's this softer way as well, and that's what I'm living now in my body, is that every day I'm having this soft, to me it feels like bubbles, like awareness. So I'm constantly having these big revelations in this super gently way, and with that it just moves into my body and my energy in a different way. Whereas for instance the last ayahuasca ceremony I did was 1.5 years ago, and honestly I'm still integrating it because it was so intense. Like I was dying and dying and dying and dying and dying. It was like buffo for 8 hours, so it was super intense. And it's like, and I physically was hurting for days, and like I was like a newborn. Like I had no kind of, afterwards I almost didn't know how to relate to people. So
consistent change over time.
So tell us, I want to would you give a short introduction to Centered?
Thank you. You read my mind there. You read the cues right. the subtle invitation, the energetic invitation. So I'm offering something that starts next week. It's called Centered. It's a free offering, 5 days, just really simple tools. It's called Simple Tools to Unprove Your Life. And it's really working with that first stage of like how do we have the tools to find awareness and bring ourselves into the eye of the storm, the center of the storm, so that we can maybe not necessarily snap straight out of trigger, but we have enough space to like meet it and not do something really destructive, and bring ourselves back to center quicker and quicker and quicker. And as a result, start to untrigger ourselves more and more and more. So it's just going to be a bunch of simple tools, you know, very simple kind of cognitive awareness tools to start practicing developing awareness of what triggers us, what is the cost of triggers, what are the types of triggers. So we're going to start doing a little bit of inventory. So there's like a kind of journaling or self-reflective stuff. And then there are some simple somatic tools that I'm going to offer as well, which will, if we practice them, and they're so simple, we practice them, we start to cultivate that sense of center, you know. And we need to practice them over time. The best time to do these kind of practices is when you're not triggered, you know. That's actually the best time, because if you do it enough times when you're not triggered, some little part inside goes, you're triggered right now, do the tool. But if I haven't done them, the moment I'm triggered, you forget about all of it. So these are little simple tools that we can just start bringing into awareness in our day-to-day life that I'm going to offer. So it starts on the 27th if you're in Europe or the US, or the 28th if you're in Australia, and runs for 5 days. It's just 20 minutes a day of lives. They will be recorded, and those recordings will be available for a week after it finishes as well. And there are like almost 2,000 people have signed up so far, which is like phenomenal.
It's so
I'm like really excited, excited.
It's a testament to you and your work. And I've been following you for a while now. I'm going to drop the link afterwards. And I just want to quickly say, so what I am promoting is my Embrace Your Inner Slut, which is, for women. And there we will also go into a lot of the energetics of trauma when it comes to relating, but in a different perspective, because the focus is on the self when it comes to sexuality and boundaries and the witch wound and also sisterhood wounds. So, and it's like people are like, why slut? Well, the thing is that I think the word that is the most triggering and the most scary for women and girls is the word slut. We tend to be super scared of being called it. So there's a lot of behavior that we do to suppress, avoid, or numb in order to not be a slut. And that's a shadow. And that's why Embrace the Inner Slut.
Well, you know, something that I've consistently observed, and I think it's such an amazing thing to see, is that as women start to do their personal development work, naturally they start to become more and more sexual, because the feminine is pleasure oriented. It's a pleasure oriented being, but there is that shame of like, if I enjoy sex, if I enjoy pleasure, that makes me a slut. There's something wrong with me. We have such a intense cultural conditioning around women having to hide their desire for sexual pleasure, sexual fulfillment, sexual intimacy. And that makes sense, because when you drop down from developmental stages, there's a lot of predatory men who don't understand the nature of their sexual energy, and they're out trying to take. And so women have to kind of protect against that. But as we move up into kind of a more conscious space, some of the men start to develop more care. And actually, I find, interestingly, as women do more spiritual work, they become more sexual. And as men do more spiritual work, they become less hyper-focused on sex. They become more interested in consciousness and presence. And we bring that. David Data likes to say that for men, consciousness is spiritual practice. It's practicing presence and witness and emptiness. For women, sex is like health. It's vitality and life-giving. You know, I know that if a woman doesn't have orgasmic pleasure, after a period of time, she goes into a state called tumescence, and everything gets irritable and scratchy, and she'll be like more catty and everything. Have some good orgasms, it's like, oh, everything's fine again. You know, I'm relaxed now. There is a need in the female body for this.
I can completely, like, I haven't had sex, like I've had sex now since March now and then, but it's been like up to 2 months in between. So it's just been a little bit like random, and it's been needed. So, but I also notice in my body that, you know, there's stagnation, that I need to have that movement. But what also happened that period is that I am multi-orgasmic, so I can have spontaneous energy orgasms. And that's also why I feel like I can still guide in the Embrace the Inner Slut. And it was actually my slut that I feel that chose celibacy, because she was tired of the the boring sex, you know, friction based, just and I think that's also very relevant in relating, right? It's like often it tends to be this chase, like man is hunting for sex and woman is using sex to reward or like do it for the man, and no wonder it becomes this dynamic in the world. So yeah, when we're embracing this part of ourselves, we're also creating an attraction to different types of energy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Beautiful offering.
Yeah. I feel like that was a beautiful ending.
Yeah. Nice
Super
point.
fun.
End on a high, end on a peak.
Well, thank you for taking the time. It has been absolutely a true pleasure and joy.
Yeah.
And I'll catch you on Sunday. It will be, or Sunday for the center. I'm looking forward.
I picked a time zone. It's going to be very early for me. I'll be up at 6:30 in the morning my time to do this.
That's
because I wanted to make it available for people in Australia. It'll be 7:30 for most of Australia. I just happen to be in a state that's a little bit behind in time, and it's the afternoon in the US and it's the evening in Europe. So afternoon in the Americas. So hopefully lots of people can find a way to make it there.
Yeah, and if not, we catch the replay.
Catch the replay.
Okay. Lots of love.
Thanks.